Well, it looks like President Trump has done it again. Russia is in complete panic mode as a result of President Trump and President Zelensky of Ukraine meeting tomorrow on Friday. Russia panicked. And what we heard today is that the Russian President Vladimir Putin and President Trump had a 2-hour phone call to try to bring tensions down. Because guess what President Putin was concerned with? He was worried that President Trump tomorrow could potentially arm Ukraine with Tomahawk missiles. That was what the discussions were. So, according to reports, things are looking better, and now President Trump and Vladimir Putin are going to meet very soon. But look at this right here. It says Trump's surprise call with Putin throws Ukraine aid into question. According to reports, President Zelensky of Ukraine was going to the White House tomorrow and still is, and he is likely going to ask and almost just bluntly tell President Trump that Ukraine needs those Tomahawk missiles to push Russia back. That they don't plan on using them, but they need them at their disposal because it would look like a serious threat towards Russia. Well, I don't know if that happens, but he's still going. I want to read a little of this to you. It says right here, Trump said last month that he believed Ukraine could beat Russia on the battlefield with more help from the West. He followed that up earlier this week by saying he might arm Ukraine with powerful Tomahawk cruise missiles that are capable of striking deep into Russian territory, putting Moscow within range. Vladimir Putin does not want that. That is why that meeting tomorrow was seen as a huge threat to Russia. Look at this though. This article from Bloomberg says Trump-Putin call reframes tomorrow's Zelensky White House visit. But how? I want to read a little of this to you. It says right here, everything seemed in place for tomorrow's meeting between President Donald Trump and Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky. Then Trump announced he and Russian leader Vladimir Putin had just had a very productive call and soon would be having a second face-to-face summit on ending the war in Ukraine, this time in Budapest. Says now things look kind of awkward. Ukraine had delegations fanning out across the halls of power in Washington ahead of Zelensky's Oval Office visit. The Ukrainian leader was already in Washington and meeting with U.S. defense companies about their defense systems. Ukraine is trying to get more defensive to, again, push Russia back, to get Russia out of Ukraine entirely. President Trump initially said that maybe Ukraine just needs to give up some of their territory, allow Russia to take it over, and then we move on. So we stop losing thousands and thousands of lives every single day. Well, Zelensky didn't like that. That's why we're here. But we do know after today's phone call, and I want to read this to you, okay? So what President Trump said today. This is his exact quote on Truth Social. He says, I have just concluded my telephone conversation with President Vladimir Putin of Russia, and it was a very productive one. President Putin congratulated me and the United States on the great accomplishment of peace in the Middle East, something that he said has been dreamed of for centuries. I actually believe that the success in the Middle East will help our negotiation in attaining an end to the war with Russia-Ukraine. President Putin thanked the First Lady Melania for her involvement with children. He was very appreciative and said that this will continue. We also spent a great deal of time talking about trade between Russia and the United States when the war with Ukraine is over. At the conclusion of the call, we agreed that there will be a meeting of our high-level advisors next week. The United States' initial meetings will be led by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, together with various other people to be designated. A meeting location is to be determined. President Putin and I will then meet in an agreed-upon location, Budapest, Hungary, to see if we can bring the inglorious war between Russia and Ukraine to an end. President Zelensky and I will be meeting tomorrow, in the Oval Office, where we will discuss my conversation with President Putin and much more. I believe great progress was made with today's telephone conversation. And according to reports, there were a lot of there was progress, which is good, because we haven't seen a lot of progress, and the war between Russia and Ukraine continues. And the reason why this is such a big deal is because this is causing inflation across the entire world. This is also causing additional confrontations between other nations as well, just because there's other nations getting involved in this war. Europe, for example, is hurting. The United States wants to help Europe as much as possible, which is one of the reasons why President Trump reached out to Vladimir Putin. Do want to show you a couple other things though. Look at this right here. It says, Trump says he and Putin will meet in Budapest to discuss end to Russia-Ukraine war. Now, it says on Friday, okay, I want to read you this right here. On Friday, he will be meeting with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky at the White House. Mr. Trump said high-level U.S. and Russian advisors will meet next week ahead of his meeting with Putin. Now, here's the reason why this is such a big deal. Okay, President Trump has now laid the groundwork. Okay, and I've been saying this for a couple weeks now, that President Trump does not want to send Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. And according to Pentagon officials, that would be a colossal mistake. But what he wants Russia to believe is that he's willing to send the Tomahawk cruise missiles to Ukraine, because then Russia's now going to come to the negotiation table, because they now believe that President Trump is willing to do this. When President Zelensky is also in the United States talking with defense contractors and trying to figure out what he can get access to, again, in order to win this war with Russia, it's putting Russia on the defensive. That's a good thing, because this means we're getting closer to an end of this war. I want to read you something else though. Right here, it says, let me read this right here. It says, Mr. Trump last met Mr. Putin with Putin in person in Alaska in August. Senate Majority Leader John Thune said Thursday he plans to move ahead with the bill to impose sanctions on Russia that has overwhelming bipartisan support, saying the time has come. Goes on to say, I think we need to move. This is from the South Dakota Republican, said the Capitol shortly after Mr. Trump shared that he was on a call with Vladimir Putin. So the key here is that it looks like there's going to be movement on the U.S. side, which is going to hurt Russia even more. That's, according to reports, why President Trump and Vladimir Putin had that call today. Now, here's the interesting thing, okay? Look at this right here. It says, after Putin's summit, Trump changed his mind on supporting Ukraine's strikes on Russian energy targets. Okay? I want to read a little of that to you. It says the U.S. has increased intelligence sharing with Ukraine to include information on targets deeper inside Russian territory as part of a strategic shift both countries hope will restart negotiations with Moscow that stalled after the summit between U.S. President Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin in Alaska this summer, because again, that did fail. So, like I just said, this is a strategic move in order to get Moscow back to the negotiation table to determine what are they willing to accept from Ukraine and what is Ukraine willing to accept from Russia in order to end this war. Again, thousands of people are losing their lives every single day from both sides. Not only that, but the United States is concerned this is going to lead to a much larger regional war, potentially pulling in a NATO nation. And that right there, again, would cause the United States to get involved. So, we're going to see what happens over the next probably a couple of days, but really over the next week. Then from there, probably over the next month or two. And again, the United States is having a tough time right now because we know that there's this war going on. We have a conflict with Venezuela that obviously I've been talking about as well. And then on top of all this, we have a government shutdown that we have yet to resolve. So, as of right now, what we're hearing is that we have to do more. President Trump is doing what he can, according to reports, in order to end this war finally and get back to somewhat of a normal life. But all this is coming out because Russia is panicking that United States is about to send a Tomahawk missile to Ukraine. So we'll see what the meeting with President Trump and President Vladimir Zelensky of Ukraine is going to be about tomorrow. And as soon as we get that information, I promise I'll bring you the latest news and updates as soon as possible. But that's what we know as of today. So again, thank you guys for watching. Consider subscribing, and I'll see you guys on the next one.